Hey, how you doing? I'm Adam Post, publisher of College of the Dead, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books. It's a lot of comic books. It's more than you can put in a long box, plus all the different cover editions. Oh my God, thousands of comic books. And look, today we are talking about comic book distribution, which is something I know a lot about. It's pretty exciting. You don't get to talk about that very much, but hey, it's the hot thing right now, and I have all the answers. So this is an interesting article from about Buddy Saunders from Bleeding Cool, and this was taken from another article where Buddy Saunders wrote a guest column in a website called Comic Mix, and that's an interesting little website. I've never seen it before. It's another one of the comics news websites or whatnot. But this is interesting because of who Buddy Saunders is. So Buddy Saunders has been in the industry for a very long time. Buddy owned most famously Lone Star Comics, which is a very well-known chain if you know the comic book industry. They were a chain of 7 stores, founded in 1977, as listed here in the article. And a great guy to deal with, Buddy Saunders. Everybody knew he's a legit guy and he's good people. He sold off the comic book stores, and then he started up mycomicshop.com, which is where I actually buy back issues of my comics from and other comics I'm interested in. So Buddy evolved his business from retail stores to direct-to-consumer sales through mail order through a website. And it's a pretty significant website. They do a lot of advertising on Facebook, a lot of advertising really all over the internet. If you visit the website once, you will find this website will follow you wherever you go. Buddy is there trying to sell you more comic books, and he does it pretty effectively. He's actually pretty cutting edge, and I bring this up so that people understand Buddy Saunders is not one of these guys who, he was in the comic book business years ago. He's in his 70s or something now, and he's kind of lost touch, and he doesn't know what the hot stuff is all about. He doesn't do business with crowdfunding. I don't see anything related to that with his website. I don't see crowdfunded comics on his website. However, he does have a pre-order business where he is pre-selling new comics for 35% off. So he's very competitive, and he's a big mail order retailer that way. I spoke with him last year. He told me they're doing better business and making more money than they ever have before. And I was really happy to hear that. He gives you an opportunity to sell comic books directly to him. And he's one of the few comic book guys who actually give you prices on back issues right up front. He'll tell you what they're looking for. You'll see you can search your collection basically by title, and you'll see what he's willing to pay. And they pay straight cash for it. He has back issues of comics, tremendous back issue inventory, and they're very reasonably priced. There's another company, milehighcomics.com, which is also very well known by a legendary retailer, Chuck Rosansky. Chuck is a really interesting guy, and he's got a really interesting blog on his website talking about the history of comic book stores and actually how he got started buying an old collection of comics. But the prices on mycomicshop.com are a lot more reasonable, let's just say lower priced than Mile High Comics. And everybody has, whoever owns books, you can sell them for whatever you want. But if you want a good price, take a look at any books you'd want on on mycomicshop.com. The other thing they do is auctions, which is very impressive. The auctions, anyone, if you have a comic that's worth $25 or more, or original artwork you want to sell, they have a really robust, impressive auction site. A lot of people don't know of this, but Buddy's thousands and thousands and thousands of direct-to-consumer customers do. and they've got all sorts of things going on here. He has his own eBay operating basically over here, niche oriented just for comics. It's successful. It's robust. I mean, I looked at it and I was pretty damn surprised to see how much stuff is actually on it. I discovered it last year and I was like, geez, there's a lot of stuff on here. So yeah, he's got a lot of stuff. He's also aggressively on eBay, Amazon. He's all over the place. Very sophisticated. Really knows his stuff. He also has a sophisticated want list system. And if you go onto his website and you're looking for a back issue and he doesn't have it, you can click add it to my want list and it'll email you when it comes back in inventory, which is fantastic. I mean, that's, Amazon.com level stuff. And he's got a great business where he buys massive liquidations. And this is the secret of these mail order guys. He can buy massive liquidations of comic book stores and unsold comics at very low prices, pennies on the dollar, and very successfully resell them at full retail. Or he can flip them and sell them to foreign countries in mass quantities for considerable profit, because even 5 cents a comic is a profit for what he pays for them. So very sophisticated and successful businessman, making it in comic book retailing. So Buddy's take on what's going on with Diamond and DC and the two new distributors that DC decided to help create is basically this. Buddy is saying, listen, he's going to stick with, and I'm on his email list because I've bought from mycomicshop.com before. And so I saw this morning, and then I saw this article. And he's saying, look, he's going to wait on Diamond to start shipping again. He's not going to try to get books a few weeks early. And the reason why is he's got a long relationship with Diamond. He's going to support Diamond, and he thinks that DC is making a mistake with this move. Now, I don't think that DC is making a mistake with this move. I think that DC did a terrible job of communicating what they think is the new reality for retailing comic books. But I think that, what DC is doing essentially, yes, they created these two new distributors working with these mail order retailers. They're really just focusing and selling directly to consumer through these mail order retailers. DC is betting that the comic book store model is no longer valid. It's not realistic. It's not realistic that people are going to open up a comic shop, successfully resell DC's comics at full cover price, and everybody is happy, and it's a successful business. It's not a successful business anymore for comic book stores. Comic book stores have been going out of business left and right. So I agree that for DC to look and say, you know what, let's get close with Midtown Comics. They do a lot of direct-to-consumer business. They're very financially stable. They don't need a financial bailout. Same with this discount comic book service, the other distributor. They don't need a financial bailout. They have customers that are buying their comics at 40% off a cover price. Discount comic book service is taking a very small margin, same with Midtown, on new comics. And it's a successful business model. It works for reselling comics, for getting comics to consumer. So it's the next best thing to selling directly to an individual fan for DC Comics. It's incredibly efficient. So for a DC Comics to look at their business model and say, well, why do we need to sell to Diamond and then have Diamond resell to these mail order retailer operations when they can just sell directly to the mail order retailer operations? And what's more, they can give the mail order retailer operations some additional business by saying, hey, if you want to sell to stores, go ahead and resell to stores too. Increase your volume, keep these stores in line, control the process, and go have a great time. And that's what DC is doing. DC should be explaining this. It shouldn't be Adam Post explaining this. But that's what DC is doing. So Buddy goes on to explain a problem that he was having when he was in the retail store business, and how Steve Geppi helped him work through that problem along with Carol Kalish, who's an executive for Marvel, and they made things easy for him when he was in a tough time. He's talking about back in the day, there was a company called Glenwood Distributors. I'm pretty sure that's who Buddy is referring to. Glenwood was a very successful, they were like Diamond before there was Diamond Distributors. They were one of the big chains, and they were moving a lot of comic books, and they were successful. And then the owner decided he would sell Glenwood to his managers, and the managers did a terrible job running the business. And then it was too late to save it. They actually did file a corporate bankruptcy, and a lot of people were owed money, and that Glenwood went out of business. In the meantime, when Glenwood was going out of business and screwing up orders, Steve Jeppe came in and he provided consistency for retail stores, and he did it for Buddy Saunders. So, Buddy makes a point here where he feels that having mail order retailers also function as distributors for comic book stores is a bad thing, and it should never happen. Well, honestly, I don't agree with him there, because Steve Jeppe used to be a comic book store retailer, and Steve Jeppe, as a retailer, then leveraged his volume to then go ahead and start doing distribution. And a lot of stores would do this because there was a discount schedule where the more you bought, the bigger the discount you got. So if you sub-distributed to other stores, stores would get bigger discounts. This was before the exclusivity of Marvel and Heroes World and DC and Diamond, and because that DC and Diamond was the thing that finalized what was going to be happening in the comic book industry for the next, whatever it was, 25 years, some really long time, like in 1995. But anyway, DC is backing up these these mail order retailers and saying, look, you guys are the future. We're going to finance you. And Buddy is saying, oh, why are these? Oh, so yeah. So to Buddy's point that a retailer can't do distribution, that's his opinion, and he's entitled to it, but that's just not the way the industry has been over the years. Even Mile High Comics was always a direct-to-consumer mail-order operation. They had a wholesale operation called Alternate Realities, where they were distributors for comics as well. They ran it for a while, not very long, because as Chuck Rosansky explains in his milehighcomics.com blog, it wasn't sensible. There weren't enough retailers located closely enough to where he was at. So, fourth, why are these two distributors necessary? It's not that the two distributors are necessary. It's that DC has made the decision they're going to focus on mail order retailers for their periodicals. That's what's going to happen. They're efficient, they're effective, they're financially viable, they're scalable, they can expand, and they can handle conveniently selling to other stores, as well as just about anyone else can. Buddy feels that maybe the customer service for retailers is going to be worse. Kind of, who knows? But basically, it's the mail order retailers that are the priority. And Buddy's saying it's not necessary because Diamond's going to go back into business. I believe that Diamond will be reshipping comics in May, and they will. They'll ship comics in May. But the thing of it is, DC doesn't want to be distributed exclusively through Diamond. DC wants to sell direct to their mail order retailers. That, for whatever their reasons are, they see it as the future. I don't really disagree with them. I think that is the future because the mail order retailers are viable. I sell direct to consumer when I'm publishing College of the Dead. I don't blame them for wanting to do that. It's viable. So DC isn't going to sell directly to each individual fan, but effectively they will by utilizing the mail order retailers. There will not be a lot of overhead involved in the retailing of their periodical comic books. The overhead will be very, very limited, as it already is, through a mail order operation. That's why it's viable and it makes good business sense. Just because there's a confusion over this of like, well, were there really 18 distributors and what the hell did they do? I pulled up an old file of mine from 1992. Finally came in handy. It's October 1992, right? Yeah, this is old. So just to give you a few of these companies, one of them was Multi-Book and Periodical. They were located in Burlington, Ontario. They received books in Buffalo, New York, and they serviced Burlington, Ontario. Heroes World serviced New Jersey and New York and some of Pennsylvania, and they were pretty successful, but that was their regional operation. All these distributors were focused regionally, Andromeda Publications was another distributor. They were located in Ontario also, in Canada, and they serviced places in Canada. Southern Fantasies and Games and Comics, a CIB company, was run by a cool guy. Oh, Steve Leaf. Man, I remember you, man. He was the buyer. Yeah, so they were based out of Georgia, and they serviced stores and operations in Georgia. Diamond was in Maryland, and they primarily serviced areas around Maryland, believe it or not. They weren't just a national company. As Diamond went to expand, they opened like warehouses in New York. They opened warehouses in Wisconsin to compete with Capital City. They opened regional warehouses so that they had a physical presence where they wanted to expand. And there weren't just 18 distributors or whatever. There were distributors that had multiple warehouses as well. So Diamond had, as many as 18 or 20 drop ship points of their own where they had limited storage on hand, but they would have places where retailers could go pick up their books as soon as they came out, and retailers could rush to the store and sell them. There wasn't a focus on a new comics Wednesday as much as there was a focus on, okay, comics are in, let's get them out on the shelves. There was Comics Unlimited run by Walter Wang, which was eventually acquired by Diamond Comic Distributors. Diamond acquired a lot of these distributors, or they acquired their customer list. And the difference is just kind of a financial difference of whether or not they assumed the debts of these companies and the assets when they took them over. There are business reasons to not acquire debts and assets. Friendly Frank's Distributors was run by a gentleman named Frank Manjarciana. Nice guy. He had, I believe, 2 warehouses. He was in Indiana, and guess where he serviced? Indiana. He was regional. He serviced them. He was successful. Capital City Distributors was pretty big. They were one of the early distributors, and their last big thing was they made so much money they did not know what to do with it in the early 1990s. They made a fortune. They expanded with huge headquarters, other multiple distribution centers, other warehouses. They had a huge fulfillment center they invested in, and a huge headquarters office. To go visit it was like, what are you doing here? They just did not know what to do with all the extra money they were making. Well, eventually that was a problem for them because they started hiring like a whole extra layers of stupid executives that were really just making trouble. They made some trouble for me with my biography comics, even though they never had a legal problem with them. Because we were doing unauthorized biography comics in the early 90s, and of course that's covered by the First Amendment. But still, they were just other stupid things they were doing. Well, Capital got ahead of themselves and got into trouble. And when Marvel signed up with Heroes World, Diamond was very slick and got an exclusive deal with DC right under Capital's nose. And Capital was left with barely anything to distribute and went out of business. Diamond then eventually took over Capital's receivables, not payables, but receivables, and went in to go collect money from retailers. Comics Hawaii, guess what? They used to service Hawaii, run by Ron. I forget Ron's last name. He was a nice guy. Styx was also in Canada. Canada had multiple distributors. Canada had more comic book distributors than comics has had in a long time, even currently. And Intergalactic Trading Company was another operation that used to have a really large comic store, and they also did some distribution based out of Florida, Orlando, Florida. There was also Second Genesis out of Oregon, and they distributed in Oregon and also Canada, I believe. And they're pretty sizable, very legitimate operation. They did really well. They're still in business. They sell direct-to-consumer retail through Amazon. They have a very big Amazon store. Why were there all these retail distributors? Why were there all distributors for stores? Well, some of them were also in retail. And the reason was comic books were distributed regionally. There was a big focus on, all right, well, I'm the guy in New York and I'm getting the comics out first, or Florida or wherever you were located. And the regional location, the regional presence had a lot to do with how quickly you could get comics out to the stores. So that's the reason. They were also moving a lot of volume. There was a lot of demand. There was a lot of interest. I was talking to a friend of mine the other night who was not one of these distributors, another guy who had a small distributorship and mail order retail operation, and then later went into publishing. And he and I were talking, and he was reminding me how distributors actually would buy extra copies and hold them at their own risk and sell them to retailers. So they might over order. If it was going to be a hot book in the 1980s, they might buy 10%, 20%, 50% more from the publisher, hold them, and then resell them to retailers, and then increase the price to retailers for as much as like 50% more than the normal price would be. So they would actually be able to hold the inventory. That's how much demand there was. Hold extra comics at their own risk and their own expense, and then sell them to comic stores, because comics, things would get hot. And the other thing was multiple distributors having multiple backstocks, so that retailers, if something got sold out with one distributor, could buy from another distributor. The other advantage of having multiple distributors was a disadvantage to some of the distributors, but an advantage to retailers was they could run up a bill with one of the distributors and then owe one money and then run off and buy from the other one. And that created some disruption. That wasn't always great. So it's always good to have multiple distributors if it's viable. If it's really viable to have multiple comic book distributors handling all these books, for paper thin margins as they are now, because the more volume goes down for a single title, the more inefficient it is for a distributor to handle that title. It's like printing. The first 1,000 copies costs X amount of dollars. Well, let's talk about a 48-page full-color graphic novel printed by Mixam, because that's a reference, one of the printers we all use. It's about $4.25 to print 400. To print 401, that extra one copy is $1.15. It's much cheaper than the average cost. So same goes for doing distribution of any kind. You have to catalog a product. You have to create a code number for a product. You have to receive a product. You have to reship it. You have to handle it. So the cost of handling 10,000 copies of one comic on a distributor's side is the same as handling 15,000 copies of one comic. So the distribution model in the future is really not viable to have multiple comic book distributors. It's fine for mail order retailers, because for mail order retailers, their cost of handling one extra retail account, a discounted retail account, which is what these stores are going to become, they're not creating a whole new computer system to sell to comic stores. It's very cost efficient for them to sell to an extra 100, 200, 300 customers. Already, I guarantee you, Discount Comic Book Service handles at least 10,000, if not 25,000 accounts direct to consumer. So what's the big deal for them to add 1,000 stores that get a little bit extra discount compared to their direct to consumer business model? It's basically the same thing. It's basically the same thing. So who is going to go in and compete with Diamond? No one, because it's a terrible business. It only kind of works probably a little bit when Diamond is the only person, the only business doing that distribution. That's why there's only one of them. So you've got publishers like Alterna that will sell directly to retailers and sell directly to consumers. They're totally vertically integrated that way. And they also publish them, and they also broker printing for them. That's a great business model. Because until there's enough scale, until there's more volume for comic book periodicals, you're not going to see distributors wanting to deal with them. That's why newsstand distributors didn't want to deal with comic books anymore. It wasn't the publisher's idea. It was the newsstand distributors saying, we don't want to run around for $1.99 retail product and to try to make a small margin and handle all these magazines. They were getting the books at no risk to the newsstand distributors. They still didn't even want them. Even at the height of newsstand distribution, newsstand distributors didn't really want to carry the entire line of what Marvel and DC were publishing. Why? Because it wasn't profitable. So, I agree with Buddy Saunders. The way that DC handled this was atrocious, ridiculous, nonsensical, unprofessional, and it's a slight to the whole comic book industry. But that said, I don't agree with Buddy Saunders that it wasn't a good move. It's the only move. You sell directly to the mail order retailers. Let the mail order retailers handle comic stores as if they are fans that buy in bigger quantity. And if they want to hustle and resell them, let them hustle and resell them. But it's not viable to support a business model like a comic book retail store that has become no longer viable, particularly with the gigantic health incident that recently happened. Only more of the stores are going to go out of business, which means the scale is reduced. As far as Diamond Comic Distributors, it's run by a multimillionaire. I'm sure they're going to do just fine. Maybe they'll go into publishing. That would be interesting. We'll see what happens next. Make sure you subscribe to my channel because it's fascinating. Click the bell for notifications because otherwise you won't find out when I do a new video. And leave comments below or I won't know how you really feel. I'll see you again soon with another video. And if I don't see you, I'll miss you.